At 13:47, 12 small black dots screamed over the occupied fields of Zaporizhia, racing at 97 kilometers an hour toward a Russian ammunition train. The air vibrated with the sound of electric blades. In a bunker below, the operators watched their screens flicker as the first 152mm shell landed 800 meters away, shaking dust from the ceiling. Their mission window, 12 minutes. Their choice, abort and survive, or continue and disappear beneath artillery fire. On the monitors, a thin plume of diesel smoke cut through the horizon. Their target, a stretch of rail 2 kilometers long, exposed, unprotected, and fleetingly perfect. They had studied this corridor for weeks. They knew it would last precisely 97 seconds. In that short breath of time, steel and silence would decide the balance between courage and extinction. A cheap drone, a reel of glass fiber thinner than fishing line, and a handful of men armed with an idea. The paradox is brutal. Intellect against iron, light against noise, a modern war fought by shadows. Subscribe and follow a lie, not for a headline, but for the story behind every heartbeat of battle. They told the gunners they would see nothing until it was over. They were wrong. At 13:47, 12 small black dots screamed over the occupied fields of Zaporizhia, racing at 97 kilometers an hour toward a Russian ammunition train. The air vibrated with the sound of electric blades. In a bunker below, the operators watched their screens flicker as the first 152mm shell landed 800 meters away, shaking dust from the ceiling. Their mission window, 12 minutes. Their choice, abort and survive, or continue and disappear beneath artillery fire. On the monitors, a thin plume of diesel smoke cut through the horizon. Their target, stretch of rail, 2 kilometers long, exposed, unprotected, and fleetingly perfect. They had studied this corridor for weeks. They knew it would last precisely 97 seconds. In that short breath of time, steel and silence would decide the balance between courage and extinction. A cheap drone, a reel of glass fiber thinner than fishing line, and a handful of men armed with an idea. The paradox is brutal. Intellect against iron, light against noise, a modern war fought by shadows. Subscribe and follow our one not for a headline, but for the story behind every heartbeat of bat. The warning did not come as an alarm, but as a tremor in the headset. A slight distortion, a rising hum beneath the operator's voice. On Russian scopes 10 kilometers away, the simultaneous surge of 48 brushless motors flared like stadium lights against the electromagnetic background. To those who watched, it was unmistakable. 12 craft lifting in unison, pulsing signals like the heartbeat of a creature far too loud for stealth. Inside the Ukrainian bunker, the air changed. The chief operator, calm by habit, glanced at the telemetry panel. Range to target, 12 minutes. Artillery triangulation, probable within 3. It was not a question of if, but when. A distant rumble grew into a concussion. The first 152mm shell landed 800 meters short, kicking a halo of soil into the air. Dust drifted down from the ceiling, fine as flour. Here, someone swore softly. Another smiled, not from bravery, but the absurdity of mathematics being this loud. Their doctrine had anticipated detection. 3 bunkers, spaced 500 meters apart, formed a defensive triangle. Each could continue the mission if the others fell. It was geometry turned into survival. A shell at that range killed everything within 300 meters, but beyond 500, the shockwave flattened only grass and pride. The order came without drama. Continue. Oh! They had rehearsed those syllables more times than any prayer. The team began to transfer control lines to secondary relays. One operator monitored drone telemetry. Another prepped the relocation pack, fiber spools, battery backups, communication boards, ready to be moved through a connecting tunnel to Bunker 4. Outside, A BTR reconnaissance vehicle had already sighted the swarm and opened fire. The morning air filled with red tracer arcs, each one a glowing thread of probability. 4 drones climbed, 4 dropped low, 4 pressed straight through the center line, a maneuver pre-scripted for chaos. Machine gun rounds stitched the sky but struck nothing vital. The pattern looked random, it was not. The distribution was the mathematical version of courage, a choice made weeks earlier by men who understood that randomness can be design. In the dust-filled bunker, the chief marks time again. 9 minutes remaining. The mission was now under fire and fully alive. TL. From the air, the swarm looked ordinary, a dozen small frames slicing through wind and sunlight. But each one carried a secret tale, a fiber-optic cable thinner than fishing line, invisible unless the sun caught it just right. In those strands of glass lay the entire logic of the mission. Inside the bunker, the engineers had argued about it for weeks. Radio waves were fast but fragile, easily drowned by noise. Fiber, however, spoke in pulses of light. It did not whisper through air. It sprinted through glass at 200,000 kilometers per second, immune to interference. Trying to jam a fiber link was like trying to stop a torch beam by shouting at it. As the physics simply did not care. Each reel was a modified fishing spool, spring-loaded to release at exactly 12,000 meters. Beyond that distance, the cables would unspool to their limit and detach automatically. The idea was almost crude in its simplicity, born not in laboratories but in garages and basements where inventors used fishing gear, camera fiber, and persistence. What the drones lacked in size, they repaid with cunning. Below, Russian jammers flooded the spectrum with raw power, 10 kilowatts of noise screaming across every frequency. Commercial drones would have folded instantly. These did not. Their data traveled as light, silent, and flawless. On the monitors, feeds from the lead drone streamed in, sharp and unbroken, rail lines, smoke, the sun glancing off steel. Then, a concussion, the third artillery round, closer. Shrapnel hissed through air at 1,500 meters per second. 3 thin lines snapped mid-flight, cables of drones. 2, 5, and 8 sliced like thread. Their screens blinked once and switched to backup radio control, the only option left. It meant they were now visible to the electronic storm, vulnerable. In Bunker 1, the decision was quiet, but absolute. Here, continue. Relocate. The team lifted the control racks, slung the cable spools over shoulders, and ran through the connecting tunnel. Behind them, another shell cracked the surface, close enough to throw soil through the ventilation shaft. But the lines of light held. 9 drones remained tethered by glass, an invisible network of precision and defiance. Somewhere above, sunlight caught those fibers, and for a heartbeat, war glittered. Inside the grey cabin of the R-330 electronic warfare vehicle, everything glowed a cold green. The operator, a man who had not seen daylight in hours, leaned toward his waterfall display. The pattern unfolding across the spectrum was beautiful in its precision, rising harmonics, crisp spikes, the unmistakable pulse of multiple transmitters. He smiled. Detection complete. With a flick of a switch, 10 kilowatts of electromagnetic energy flooded the air. Within seconds, every radio channel, from 100 megahertz to 2 gigahertz, drowned under static. The jammers roared invisibly, a storm made of mathematics. Somewhere out there, the operator imagined Ukrainian signals collapsing, their controls freezing, their screens flickering to snow. In theory, nothing could survive that wall of noise. And for a moment, he was right. 3 drone signals vanished instantly, the ones that had switched to radio backup. But 9 others remained, clean and sharp, as if the jamming did not exist. The operator frowned. He adjusted filters, checked his transmitters, changed modulation. Still 9 perfect traces. He expanded the power curve, pushing the amplifiers to full load. The scope brightened like a sunrise of static. The vehicle was now broadcasting more power than a regional television station, saturating everything within 30 kilometers. He did not know that, outside his steel shell, the same noise had silenced his own side. A BTR crew at Checkpoint 9 saw the approaching swarm through thermal sights and tried to warn the Pancer air defense system 3 kilometers away. Their message dissolved into static. The radio net was dead. The blindfold had slipped over friend and foe alike. Inside the bunker, Ukrainian operators watched the feed in perfect clarity. The irony was complete. The more energy the Russians poured into the sky, the stronger the Ukrainians' advantage became. Light does not listen to noise. Fiber does not bend to thunder. The battlefield had become a study in opposites, a silence winning over sound, fragility defeating force. In his cabin, the jammer operator stared at his screen in disbelief. On paper, his system could disable drones at 30 kilometers. In practice, the sky was full of ghosts that refused to die. The bubble he had built was perfect and perfectly blind. The horizon flickered with light as the swarm came into the range of the Pancer S-1. The Russian air defense system crouched beside the railway junction. Its twin autocannons, 2 A-38M barrels, rose from their idle angle with a hiss of hydraulics. Inside the turret, the gunner peered through an electro-optical sight, a lens worth more than a house, trained now on 12 objects no larger than dinner plates. The radar had filtered them out as ground clutter. It was the human eye that caught them, darting erratically through the air. The gunner steadied his hands, guided by the computer's cold calculations. Target speed, 27 meters per second, crossing at right angles. Optimal lead, 15 meters ahead of line of sight. It was pure geometry, except the world refused to behave like a classroom. He set his fuses for airburst. Each 30mm round would detonate at a fixed distance, shredding the air into a sphere of 400 steel fragments. At 5,000 rounds a minute, he would build a wall of metal. The first burst cracked open the sky. Drone 6 vanished, swallowed in a bloom of orange flame. A heartbeat later, Drone 11 was gone. The others scattered instantly. Some climbing toward the clouds, some diving so low their shadows merged with grass. The formation dissolved into chaos by design. The gunner's training urged him to prioritize the nearest threat. The computer insisted otherwise. The higher targets were easier to track. He hesitated at 2 seconds, maybe less. He chose the high group, elevating his barrels. The decision sealed the outcome. While the autocannons chased the climbing drones, the low group slipped beneath his firing arc. The stream of shells painted the sky harmlessly while, below, 7 survivors threaded the gap. At Checkpoint 9, a BTR crew joined the fight. Traces arced red across the fields, a futile light show against targets smaller than a helmet. Each drone crossed their sights for less than a second. Time, human reaction time, made mockery of marksmanship. Bullets chewed air and dust, but found nothing alive. The gunner slammed his fist against the console, his headset filled with static from the jammers. He could not even report the miss. Geometry had won, as not his. High above the line, 4 drones peeled off from the formation and fell like dark leaves toward the rails. From the cockpit feeds they looked insignificant, tiny black shapes against the pale earth, but what they carried would change metal into molten ruin. The payloads did not roar, they burned. They did not shatter with concussive force so much as consume, eating at steel until it bent and sagged under heat and strain. The charges struck in quick succession, each impact a precise punctuation in a long, patient sentence of planning. Where the rail once carried steady weight, molten metal began to gather and flow, the smooth head of the rail losing its geometry and, with it, the ability to bear load. A problem that began as a glint in a drone camera became within moments a catastrophic change beneath 4,000 tons of momentum. The driver, watching black dots ballooning into the sky and then grouping over his rear, did the only thing he could think of: push harder. Acceleration was instinct and procedure. It felt right, but physics had a different language. Wheels that spun harder because torque outstripped adhesion polished the rail instead of gripping it, reducing traction and, perversely, slowing the train. The more he forced the throttle, the less the locomotive obeyed. Smoke followed the thermite strikes like an answering tide. A thin, black haze drifted across the valley, and, in seconds, it was thick enough to eat infrared. Thermal images, so useful in dusk and fog and rain, betrayed nothing useful now. The carbon-laden plume absorbed and scattered heat signatures until screens showed nothing but grey. For a handful of breathing seconds, the defenders' most expensive sensors became blind. Below, the soldiers scrambled. Men with rifles tried to find the silhouettes through the smoke. A Pancer gunner fought with range and angle. Plans written in peacetime doctrine collided with improvisation. Drones, meanwhile, struggled with their own constraints. Constant corrections to counterwind and avoiding gunfire burned battery reserves faster than any clean environment calculation had predicted. Amber warnings flickered across operator panels like small hearts stuttering. This was not a neat explosion, but a slow, surgical erosion of capability. Rails softened, visibility collapsed, defenses bled power and time. The attackers had not relied on a single weapon, but on a chain of effects: ASA, heat, obscuration, geometry, and endurance, each link feeding the next. When a system fails because the world it expects has been quietly altered, recovery becomes improvisation under fire. They counted remaining minutes and remaining battery percentage with equal gravity. The mission had entered its most delicate phase. Not the strike itself, but the small arithmetic of survival and timing that would decide whether the plan finished as designed or dissolved into smoke. 12,000 meters of fiber reached its limit. The reels on each drone began to tremble, spring-loaded mechanisms straining against their stops. One by one, the connectors released with a sharp metallic click, like the sound of snapped wire in a silent room. The cables fell away, ghostly threads descending through the air, glittering once before disappearing into smoke. Now the drones were free and the load. Without their lifelines of glass, they reverted to short-range radio control, exposed to the very interference they had eluded for miles. But distance favored them. At barely 1.5 kilometers from target, the jamming field mattered less than gravity and momentum. The lead drone showed 8% battery. It would have 18 seconds of powered flight left. The others blinked amber across the control screens. The operators knew the arithmetic. Every second of course correction cost survival. Every deviation burned the last reserve of charge. They trimmed their inputs to whispers, letting inertia carry what electronics could not. Through the thickening haze, the camera feeds resolved the stretch of track, a column of steel wagons, unit markings clear even through vibration blur. The white stencil on Wagon 22 read Class 1 Explosive. It was enough. In the locomotive, the engineer saw them too, 7 black dots swelling in his windscreen. He pushed the throttles beyond their stops. The diesel engines screamed, the vibration rising into the bones of the cabin. Steel wheels began to slip, friction collapsing from the secure grip of stillness to the polish of sliding metal. Acceleration fell. The harder he pushed, the slower he went. At 500 meters, the Pancer system tried one final engagement. Its guns could not depress below 5 degrees. Geometry denied him. The threat was beneath the horizon of his barrel. Drone 3's battery died first. Propellers slowed to silence, but its momentum carried it forward, a silent projectile coasting on pure physics. The operators watched its feed flicker and vanish. There was no need for words. Then, impact. Drone 1 struck the coupling between locomotive and wagon, a flash like a camera bulb in the heart of the storm. A shaped charge jet tore through steel at twice the speed of thought. Another followed, and another. Pressure valves ruptured, brake lines snapped, fuel mist ignited. For a breath, the screen filled with white, then black. Above the battlefield, the last surviving drone recorded a single frame of the rail line fracturing Atra, a bright thread of fire cutting across the earth. The shockwave rolled across the plain like a living thing. In 4 seconds, the horizon bloomed into a column of light, a rising flower of smoke and dust. Where the ammunition train had been, there was only a molten wound stretching along the track, heat shimmer bending the air. The blast lifted wagons like toys and hurled them into the fields. Those that did not burn simply folded in upon themselves, their weight betraying their purpose. Inside the command bunker, silence followed. The screens that had pulsed with telemetry now glowed blank. For a long moment, no one spoke. It was not celebration. It was the kind of quiet that follows certainty. They had done the arithmetic correctly. $4,800 in converted racing drones had erased $127 million in armored hardware, rail cars, and munitions. The lesson would travel further than the smoke. In a war defined by expenditure, this was an act defined by intellect. What these operators had shown was not the supremacy of a weapon, but of a way of thinking. These modern military equipment, vast, engineered, and expensive, and had met an opponent they could neither predict nor intercept. The drones had been no match in strength, but they were built on the truth that agility, distributed control, and improvisation are as decisive as firepower. They did not replace power, they redirected it. Strategists would later study this strike and underline acquired doctrine, that resilience lies in simplicity, that redundancy is a form of courage. These modern military equipment are tools, but they remain bound by the human understanding that guides them. Without imagination, even the most advanced machinery is deaf and blind. Outside, black smoke curled upward into a fading evening. Birds returned to the sky, untroubled by ownership. The operators sat among their empty coffee cups, faces pale in the glow of cooling screens. They did not cheer. They simply wrote down the time, 13:59, and the words "mission complete." Somewhere beyond that horizon, logistics officers would count their losses in numbers. Here, in the bunker, the reckoning was quieter, a handful of minds proving that invention is its own kind of artillery. Long after the fires died, the air over Zaporizhia still shimmered with heat. Twisted metal and scorched earth marked the place where intelligence had defeated inertia. It was not triumph that lingered, but understanding. In the end, no side won, only a lesson did. What unfolded on that afternoon was not the story of machines at war, but of people who dared to think differently. They proved that courage could be measured not only by endurance, but by imagination. When cheap ingenuity outmaneuvers the proudest systems, the question is not who possessed better weapons, but who understood the world more clearly. Modern warfare has become a paradox. The more we depend on military equipment, the more vulnerable we are to those who can read its limits. Power has shifted from the sheer weight of metal to the speed of adaptation. Steel and circuitry remain vital, but intellect is the new high ground. These were not perfect heroes, nor flawless tacticians. They were technicians, coders, and quiet minds who turned fragments of glass and current into something that could rewrite doctrine. They showed that military equipment is only as capable as the vision that directs it, that technology alone cannot think, cannot decide, cannot care. It is still human resolve that draws the line between chaos and control. The next battlefield will not be defined by borders, but by bandwidth, not by the loudest explosion, but by the smallest idea that works. In this changing equation, even the simplest spark of insight can eclipse 1,000,000 tons of steel. So, when we look upon the silhouettes of drones against the sky, we are not merely watching machines. We are seeing mirrors of our own ingenuity, our frailty, our brilliance, our constant need to outthink the noise. If you have traveled with us through this story, remember, it is not about victory or defeat, but about understanding what power truly means in the age of military equipment. Leave your thoughts below. What would you have done in their place? And, as always, they told the gunners they would see nothing until it was over. They were wrong.